The rust-colored stain on the concrete foundation had been there for decades, hidden beneath layers of salt air corrosion and decades of accumulated debris. When maintenance worker Miguel Santos first spotted it during the routine inspection of the Cyclone roller coaster's support structure on a gray March morning in 2024, he initially dismissed it as just another mark left by 37 years of ocean spray and mechanical wear. The iconic wooden coaster, built in 1927, had seen countless repairs, countless secrets buried beneath its thundering tracks. But this stain was different. It was too uniform, too deliberately concealed beneath a thin layer of concrete that didn't match the surrounding foundation. As Miguel chipped away at the anomaly with his crowbar, the metallic tang that rose from the disturbed earth made his stomach turn. He had found something that the Coney Island authorities had been searching for since the summer of 1987. The discovery would ultimately unravel a mystery that had haunted two families for nearly 4 decades, exposing secrets that had been carefully buried along with the remains. Detective Elena Vasquez had been working cold cases for the Brooklyn South Major Case Squad for 8 years when the call came in at 6:47 a.m. The voice on the other end belonged to Sergeant Mike Chen from the 60th Precinct, and his tone carried the weight of recognition that only comes when a long-dormant case suddenly springs back to life. "We've got human remains at Luna Park," Chen said, his words measured and careful. "Maintenance crew found them under the cyclone. The bones look old, Elena, real old." As she drove through the early morning traffic on the Belt Parkway, Elena's mind immediately went to the thick manila folder that had been sitting in her desk drawer for the past 3 years. A folder marked DeLuca, Vincent, and Amp. Morrison, Sarah. Missing persons, 1987. Vincent DeLuca, 17, and Sarah Morrison, 16, had vanished on July 15, 1987, during what should have been a routine summer evening at Coney Island. They had been dating for 8 months, both honor students at Midwood High School, both planning to attend college in the fall. Vincent wanted to study engineering at Brooklyn College. Sarah had been accepted to the pre-med program at SUNY Stony Brook. Their disappearance had sparked one of the largest missing persons investigations in Brooklyn's history, involving over 60 detectives, hundreds of interviews, and a media frenzy that had consumed the city for months. Elena arrived at Luna Park at 7:15 a.m. to find the area around the cyclone cordoned off with yellow tape. The morning air carried the familiar scent of salt and seaweed, mixed with the acrid smell of old wood and metal. Crime scene technicians had already begun their preliminary work, photographing the excavation site from multiple angles while the medical examiner's team prepared their equipment. The remains had been found in a shallow grave approximately 4 feet beneath the roller coaster's eastern support structure, wrapped in what appeared to be a deteriorated plastic tarp. Dr. Patricia Hoffman, the chief medical examiner, was already kneeling beside the excavation site, her silver hair tucked beneath a surgical cap as she carefully examined the exposed bones. "What do we know so far?" Elena asked, approaching the crime scene perimeter. Dr. Hoffman looked up, her expression grave. 2 bodies, both young, both showing signs of trauma. The skeletal remains are consistent with individuals in their late teens. Based on the condition of the bones and the surrounding soil, I'd estimate they've been here for at least 30 years, possibly longer. She paused, removing her latex gloves. The positioning suggests they were placed here deliberately, not just dumped. Someone took time to dig this grave. Elena felt a familiar chill run down her spine, the same sensation she experienced whenever a cold case began to reveal its secrets. After 37 years, Vincent and Sarah were finally coming home. The investigation had originally been handled by Detective Anthony Castellano, a 30-year veteran of the force who had retired in 2003. Elena had worked with Castellano on several cases before his retirement, and she remembered his obsession with the DeLuca Morrison disappearance. He had never stopped believing that the teenagers had been murdered, despite pressure from his superiors to classify the case as a runaway situation. Castellano had spent countless hours walking the boardwalk, interviewing carnival workers, checking and rechecking alibis. He had followed every lead, no matter how tenuous, driven by a conviction that Vincent and Sarah had never left Coney Island alive. Elena's first stop was the evidence room at the 60th Precinct, where the original case files were stored in a series of cardboard boxes marked with faded evidence tags. The boxes contained hundreds of photographs, witness statements, and reports that painted a picture of an investigation that had consumed the department for months. The last confirmed sighting of Vincent and Sarah had been at 8:30 p.m. on July 15, 1987, when they had been seen walking hand-in-hand toward the Wonder Wheel. Vincent had been wearing a red Coca-Cola t-shirt and blue jeans. Sarah had been dressed in a white sundress with small blue flowers. They had told their friends they were going to watch the sunset from the beach before heading home. The original investigation had focused heavily on the transient population that worked the carnival circuit during the summer months. Coney Island in 1987 was a rougher place than it would become in later decades, with a significant population of drifters, petty criminals, and seasonal workers who moved from town to town following the amusement park circuit. Detective Castellano had interviewed dozens of carnival workers, ride operators, and game attendants, but none of the leads had panned out. The investigation had also explored the possibility that Vincent and Sarah had been the victims of a random crime, perhaps a robbery gone wrong, or a sexual assault. Both teenagers had been carrying small amounts of cash. Vincent had $43 in his wallet and Sarah had $28 in her purse, but their personal belongings had never been found. Elena spent the morning reviewing the witness statements, looking for details that might have been overlooked in the original investigation. The most promising lead had come from a hot dog vendor named Carlos Mendez, who had reported seeing two teenagers matching Vincent and Sarah's description talking to a man near the Cyclone around 9:15 p.m. Mendez had described the man as being in his 30s, approximately 6 feet tall, with dark hair and wearing a maintenance uniform. The man had appeared to be giving the teenagers directions, pointing toward the area behind the roller coaster where the remains had now been found. Despite extensive efforts to locate this man, including interviews with every documented maintenance worker and carnival employee, his identity had never been established. The breakthrough came when Elena decided to cross-reference the maintenance schedules from July 1987 with the current employee records. The Cyclone had undergone significant repairs that summer, including work on the foundation and support structures. The maintenance crew had been a mix of permanent Luna Park employees and seasonal workers hired through a temp agency called Brooklyn Industrial Services. Elena located the company's records, which had been stored in a warehouse in Queens since the business had closed in 1995. The dusty files contained employment applications, work schedules, and pay stubs that provided a detailed picture of who had been working at Luna Park during the summer of 1987. One name immediately caught Elena's attention: David Kowalski, a 32-year-old maintenance worker who had been hired on July 1, 1987, just 2 weeks before the teenagers disappeared. Kowalski had worked exclusively on the Cyclone repair crew, and his timesheets showed that he had been on duty until 10 p.m. on July 15th, well past the normal quitting time of 6 p.m. More importantly, Kowalski had abruptly quit his job on July 17th, claiming a family emergency that required him to leave New York immediately. He had never returned to collect his final paycheck. Elena ran David Kowalski's name through the department's criminal database and discovered a troubling pattern. He had been arrested 3 times between 1983 and 1986 for assault and battery, though the charges had been dropped in 2 of the cases due to witness intimidation. In 1985, he had been convicted of aggravated assault against a teenage girl in Queens, but had served only 6 months due to overcrowding in the prison system. The victim, Jennifer Walsh, had been 16 years old at the time of the attack, the same age as Sarah Morrison. Elena felt her pulse quicken as she read the details of the assault. Kowalski had approached Jennifer outside a movie theater, claiming to be a police officer and asking her to help him with an investigation. When she had refused, he had struck her repeatedly with a metal pipe. The investigation into David Kowalski's whereabouts proved challenging. He had no known address after leaving New York in 1987, and his Social Security number had not been used for employment or tax purposes since that time. Elena suspected that he might have left the country or assumed a false identity. She contacted the FBI's Violent Criminal Apprehension Program and requested a nationwide search for any unsolved cases involving missing teenagers that might be connected to Kowalski's methods. The response came back within a week, identifying similar disappearances in Atlantic City, New Jersey, and Virginia Beach, Virginia, during the late 1980s and early 1990s. While Elena worked to track down Kowalski's location, the medical examiner's office completed their analysis of the remains. Dr. Hoffman's report confirmed that the bones belonged to two individuals, one male and one female, both approximately 16 to 18 years old. The cause of death had been blunt force trauma to the head, consistent with being struck by a heavy object, such as a pipe or crowbar. The injuries were similar to those inflicted on Jennifer Walsh in 1985, suggesting a pattern of behavior. More significantly, small fragments of red fabric found with the male victim's remains were consistent with the Coca-Cola t-shirt that Vincent DeLuca had been wearing on the night of his disappearance. Elena's investigation took a dramatic turn when she received a call from Detective Lisa Martinez of the Virginia Beach Police Department. Martinez had been reviewing her department's cold cases and had discovered a missing persons report filed in August 1988 for two teenagers who had vanished from the Virginia Beach boardwalk. The victims, Michael Chen and Amanda Rodriguez, both 17, had been seen talking to a maintenance worker shortly before their disappearance. A witness had described the man as being in his 30s, approximately 6 feet tall, with dark hair and wearing a work uniform. The description was remarkably similar to the one provided by Carlos Mendez in 1987. The Virginia Beach case had never been solved, but Detective Martinez had located several witnesses who had provided additional details about the suspect. A boardwalk vendor named George Patterson had seen the man speaking to multiple teenagers throughout the summer of 1988, always approaching them with the same story about needing help with a maintenance issue. Patterson had described the man as having a distinctive scar on his left hand, running from his wrist to his knuckles. Elena immediately contacted Jennifer Walsh, the assault victim from 1985, to ask if she remembered any distinguishing marks on her attacker. Walsh, now in her 50s and living in Florida, confirmed that Kowalski had indeed had a prominent scar on his left hand. The breakthrough in locating David Kowalski came from an unexpected source. Lena had contacted the Social Security Administration to request a search for any activity on Kowalski's account, hoping to find evidence of employment under his real name. The search revealed that Kowalski had applied for disability benefits in 1994, claiming a back injury that prevented him from working. His application had been processed through the Phoenix, Arizona office, and he had been receiving monthly payments for 30 years. The address on file was a mobile home park in Scottsdale, Arizona, where Kowalski had been living under his real name since 1993. Elena coordinated with the Scottsdale Police Department to conduct surveillance on Kowalski's residence. The mobile home park was a modest community populated primarily by retirees and seasonal residents. Kowalski, now 69 years old, lived alone in a single-wide trailer at the end of a quiet street. Neighbors described him as a quiet man who kept to himself, occasionally complaining about his back problems but otherwise unremarkable. He had never married, had no known friends or associates, and rarely left his trailer except to collect his mail and shop for groceries. The arrest took place on a Tuesday morning in April 2024. Elena had flown to Arizona to personally oversee the operation, accompanied by Detective Martinez from Virginia Beach and Agent Sarah Chen from the FBI. They found Kowalski in his trailer, watching television and eating breakfast. He was significantly older and frailer than the photographs from 1987, his dark hair now completely gray, and his once sturdy frame bent by age and illness. When Elena identified herself and read him his rights, Kowalski showed no surprise or resistance. He simply nodded and asked if he could finish his coffee before they left. The interrogation took place at the Scottsdale Police Department, in a small interview room with fluorescent lighting and beige walls. Elena had prepared extensively for this moment, reviewing every detail of the case and anticipating Kowalski's possible responses. She began by establishing his presence at Luna Park during the summer of 1987, showing him copies of his employment records and timesheets. Kowalski acknowledged that he had worked at Coney Island but claimed to have no memory of the specific dates or circumstances of his employment. Elena then showed him photographs of Vincent DeLuca and Sarah Morrison, taken from their high school yearbooks. Kowalski stared at the pictures for a long moment, his expression unreadable. When Elena asked if he recognized the teenagers, he shook his head slowly. "I met a lot of people that summer," he said quietly. "I don't remember everyone." Elena pressed him about the night of July 15, 1987, asking about his work schedule and whether he had been working on the Cyclone that evening. Kowalski's answers were evasive, filled with claims of poor memory and confusion about dates. The interrogation continued for several hours, with Elena methodically presenting evidence and asking specific questions about Kowalski's actions on the night of the disappearance. She showed him crime scene photographs of the excavation site, hoping to elicit a reaction that might provide insight into his state of mind. Kowalski remained largely silent, occasionally asking for water or requesting to use the bathroom. His demeanor was calm and resigned, showing none of the anger or defensiveness that Elena had expected from a confronted killer. The breakthrough came when Elena presented Kowalski with a photograph of Jennifer Walsh, the assault victim from 1985. For the first time during the interrogation, Kowalski's composure cracked. His hands began to shake, and he asked for a glass of water. Elena could see that he recognized the photograph, and she pressed him about the assault, asking whether he remembered attacking a 16-year-old girl outside a movie theater in Queens. Kowalski's voice was barely audible when he finally spoke. "That was different," he said. "That was a mistake." Elena seized on this admission, asking Kowalski to explain what he meant by different and mistake. She could see that he was struggling with the decision of whether to continue denying his involvement or to finally confess to crimes he had been carrying for 37 years. The weight of his secrets seemed to be crushing him, and Elena recognized the signs of someone who was ready to unburden himself. She leaned forward, her voice gentle but insistent. "David, Vincent, and Sarah were just kids. Their families have been waiting for answers for almost 40 years. They deserve to know what happened." Kowalski's confession came slowly, in fragments and false starts, as if he were reconstructing events that he had spent decades trying to forget. He described how he had seen Vincent and Sarah walking near the Cyclone around 9 p.m. on July 15, 1987. They had been holding hands and laughing, and something about their happiness had triggered a rage that he couldn't control. He had approached them, claiming to be a maintenance worker who needed help moving some equipment. The teenagers who'd been trusting and eager to help, following him to the area behind the roller coaster where he had been working earlier that day. What happened next was a blur of violence that Kowalski described in clinical, detached terms. He had attacked Vincent first, striking him with a pipe wrench that he had been carrying. Sarah had tried to run, but he had caught her and killed her in the same manner. The entire incident had lasted only a few minutes, but it had changed the trajectory of 3 lives forever. Kowalski had spent the next several hours digging a grave beneath the Cyclone's foundation, using the same tools he had been using for his maintenance work. He had wrapped the bodies in a plastic tarp and covered them with concrete, then reported to work the next day as if nothing had happened. Elena listened to the confession with a mixture of relief and revulsion. After 37 years, Vincent and Sarah's families would finally have answers, but the brutality of their deaths was difficult to process. Kowalski's matter-of-fact description of the murders revealed a disturbing lack of empathy and remorse. When Elena asked him why he had killed 2 innocent teenagers, he simply shrugged. "I was angry," he said. "I couldn't control it." The banality of his explanation was perhaps the most chilling aspect of his confession. The legal proceedings that followed were complicated by the passage of time and the jurisdictional issues surrounding the case. Kowalski was initially charged with 2 counts of first-degree murder in Brooklyn, but the defense team argued that the evidence was too old to be reliable, and that their client's advanced age and poor health made him unsuitable for trial. The prosecution countered that the confession was voluntary, and that the physical evidence clearly supported the charges. The case became a media sensation, with reporters from across the country covering the story of the cold case that had finally been solved. Elena's investigation had also uncovered connections to other unsolved cases across the country. The disappearances in Virginia Beach and Atlantic City showed similar patterns, and investigators from multiple jurisdictions began working together to determine the full scope of Kowalski's crimes. The evidence suggested that he had been responsible for at least 6 murders between 1987 and 1992, all involving teenage victims who had been lured to isolated locations and killed with blunt force trauma. The investigation revealed a serial killer who had operated for years without detection, moving from city to city and targeting vulnerable young people, The impact of the case on the families of Vincent DeLuca and Sarah Morrison was profound and complex. Vincent's parents, Robert and Maria DeLuca, had never given up hope that their son would return, even after 37 years. Robert had died in 2019, but Maria, now 82, was present in the courtroom when Kowalski entered his guilty plea. She had aged visibly during the proceedings, the weight of finally learning the truth about her son's fate taking a physical toll. In her victim impact statement, she described the decades of uncertainty and false hope that had defined her life since Vincent's disappearance. Sarah Morrison's family had been equally devastated by the loss and the long wait for answers. Her parents, James and Patricia Morrison, had divorced in 1994, unable to cope with the stress of their daughter's disappearance and the strain it had placed on their marriage. James had remarried and moved to Florida, while Patricia had remained in Brooklyn, volunteering with missing persons organizations and advocating for other families facing similar tragedies. The resolution of the case brought a sense of closure, but also reopened old wounds that had never fully healed. Elena's role in solving the case had been personally fulfilling, but emotionally draining. She had spent months immersed in the details of the investigation, interviewing family members, reviewing evidence, and tracking down leads. The work had taken her away from her own family and had exposed her to the darkest aspects of human nature. She had seen how a single act of violence could destroy multiple lives and create ripple effects that lasted for generations. The case had reinforced her belief in the importance of cold case investigations and the need to never give up on seeking justice for victims and their families. The trial of David Kowalski took place in Brooklyn Supreme Court in October 2024. The prosecution, led by Assistant District Attorney Michael Romano, presented an overwhelming case that included physical evidence, witness testimony, and Kowalski's own confession. The defense, headed by Public Defender Linda Zhang, argued that their client's advanced age and deteriorating mental health made him unsuitable for imprisonment. They presented evidence of Kowalski's various medical conditions, including early-stage dementia and chronic back pain, and requested that he be placed in a medical facility rather than a traditional prison. The courtroom was packed with family members, reporters, and members of the public who had followed the case since the discovery of the remains. Elena testified about her investigation, describing the painstaking process of connecting decades-old evidence to a suspect who had been living under his real name in Arizona. Dr. Hoffman presented the medical examiner's findings, explaining how the forensic evidence supported the conclusion that Vincent and Sarah had been murdered. The testimony was clinical and detailed, but it painted a clear picture of what had happened on that July evening in 1987. Kowalski's confession was played for the jury, his voice barely audible as he described the murders in flat, emotionless terms. The audio was difficult to listen to, and several family members left the courtroom during the playback. Maria DeLuca remained seated, her hands folded in her lap, listening to the man who had killed her son describe his actions with disturbing detachment. The confession was the most damaging evidence against Kowalski, providing details that only the killer could have known. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours before returning a guilty verdict on all charges. Kowalski showed no emotion as the verdict was read, sitting quietly in his wheelchair with his head bowed. Judge Margaret Walsh sentenced him to life in prison without the possibility of parole, noting that the brutality of the crimes and the defendant's lack of remorse warranted the maximum penalty. The sentence was largely symbolic, given Kowalski's age and health, but it provided a sense of justice for the families and the community. The resolution of the case had broader implications for cold case investigations and the use of new technology in solving old crimes. Elena's methodical approach to reviewing evidence and her use of database searches and interagency cooperation had demonstrated the value of never giving up on unsolved cases. The discovery of the remains beneath the Cyclone had been largely accidental, but the investigation that followed had shown how persistence and modern investigative techniques could solve even the oldest mysteries. The case also highlighted the importance of preserving evidence and maintaining detailed records. The employment records from Brooklyn Industrial Services, stored in a warehouse for nearly 30 years, had provided the crucial link that connected Kowalski to the crime scene. Without these records, the investigation might never have progressed beyond the discovery of the remains. The case served as a reminder that even seemingly insignificant documents could become vital evidence decades later. Elena's work on the case had earned her recognition from the department and the broader law enforcement community. She had been invited to speak at conferences about cold case investigations and had begun working with other departments to help solve similar cases. The success of the investigation had also led to increased funding for cold case units and the development of new protocols for handling decades-old evidence. The case had demonstrated that justice could be served even when decades had passed, providing hope for other families waiting for answers. The psychological impact of the case on everyone involved was significant and long-lasting. Elena had arranged for counseling services to be provided to the families of Vincent and Sarah, recognizing that the resolution of the case would bring both relief and renewed grief. The families had spent 37 years creating narratives about what might have happened to their children, and learning the brutal truth required a fundamental adjustment to their understanding of the tragedy. The counseling sessions focused on helping them process their emotions and develop coping strategies for moving forward. Maria DeLuca found the truth about her son's death both devastating and liberating. She had spent decades wondering if Vincent was still alive somewhere, perhaps suffering from amnesia or living under a different identity. The confirmation that he had been murdered had destroyed her last hopes, but it had also ended the uncertainty that had defined her life for so long. She began attending a support group for families of murder victims, finding comfort in sharing her experiences with others who understood her pain. Patricia Morrison's response to the case resolution was more complex. She had spent years advocating for missing persons and had developed a deep understanding of the investigative process. The successful resolution of her daughter's case validated her belief that persistence and dedication could lead to answers, but it also forced her to confront the reality of Sarah's violent death. She continued her volunteer work with missing persons organizations, using her experience to help other families navigate the criminal justice system. The case had also affected the broader Coney Island community, which had lived with the mystery of the missing teenagers for nearly 4 decades. The revelation that the victims had been buried beneath one of the area's most iconic attractions was both shocking and somehow fitting. The Cyclone had been a symbol of joy and excitement for generations of New Yorkers, but it had also been hiding a terrible secret. The discovery of the remains had prompted discussions about the area's history and the changes that had occurred since 1987. Elena's investigation had revealed that Coney Island in 1987 was a very different place from the family-friendly destination it had become in recent years. The area had been struggling with crime, urban decay, and economic decline, creating an environment where transient criminals could operate with relative impunity. The seasonal nature of the amusement park employment had attracted workers from across the country, many of whom had criminal backgrounds or were trying to escape from their past. The lack of background checks and the informal hiring practices had created opportunities for predators like Kowalski to find employment in victims. The case had also highlighted the challenges faced by investigators in the pre-digital age. In 1987, law enforcement agencies had limited ability to share information or coordinate investigations across jurisdictions. The lack of computerized databases and communication systems had made it difficult to identify patterns or connect similar crimes occurring in different locations. Detective Castellano's investigation had been thorough and professional, but he had been working with limited resources and technology. The tools and techniques available to Elena in 2024 had made it possible to solve a case that had been unsolvable 37 years earlier. The media coverage of the case had been extensive, with reporters from local and national outlets covering every aspect of the investigation and trial. The story had captured the public imagination, combining elements of true crime, historical mystery, and human drama that resonated with audiences across the country. The case had been featured in documentaries, podcasts, and books, ensuring that the stories of Vincent DeLuca and Sarah Morrison would not be forgotten. Elena's work on the case had also led to the development of new protocols for handling cold case investigations. The department had created a specialized unit dedicated to reviewing unsolved cases, with Elena serving as the lead investigator. The unit had been provided with additional resources and training, including access to advanced forensic techniques and database systems. The success of the DeLuca Morrison case had demonstrated the value of investing in cold case investigations and had led to similar programs being established in other jurisdictions. The resolution of the case had provided closure for the families and the community, but it had also raised new questions about the nature of justice and the passage of time. Kowalski's conviction had been important symbolically, but his advanced age and poor health had limited the practical impact of his sentence. The families had waited 37 years for answers, only to see the perpetrator die in prison less than 2 years after his conviction. The case had demonstrated that justice could be served even after decades, but it had also shown the limitations of the criminal justice system in addressing historical crimes. Elena continued to work on cold cases, driven by her belief that every victim deserved justice and every family deserved answers. The success of the DeLuca Morrison investigation had reinforced her commitment to this work and had shown her that even the most challenging cases could be solved with persistence, dedication, and the right resources. She had learned that the passage of time did not diminish the importance of seeking justice and that the pain of loss did not fade with the years. The case had also had a lasting impact on the physical location where the crimes had occurred. The area beneath the cyclone had been excavated and thoroughly examined, with soil samples taken and analyzed for additional evidence. The roller coaster itself had been temporarily closed during the investigation, but it had reopened once the crime scene had been processed. The knowledge that 2 teenagers had been murdered and buried there had changed the way many people viewed the iconic attraction, adding a layer of tragedy to a place that had been designed to bring joy and excitement. The families of Vincent DeLuca and Sarah Morrison had established a memorial fund in their children's names, supporting programs for missing persons and cold case investigations. The fund had provided grants to law enforcement agencies and victim advocacy organizations, helping to ensure that other families would not have to wait as long for answers. The memorial had become a way for the families to honor their children's memory while also working to prevent similar tragedies from occurring in the future. Elena's investigation had also revealed information about other potential victims of David Kowalski. The evidence suggested that he had been responsible for multiple murders across several states, but many of these cases remained unsolved due to the passage of time and the lack of physical evidence. Elena had worked with investigators from other jurisdictions to review these cases, but the advanced age of witnesses and the deterioration of evidence had made it difficult to build strong cases. The work had provided some closure for additional families, but it had also highlighted the limitations of the criminal justice system in addressing serial crimes that occurred decades ago. The case had demonstrated the importance of maintaining hope and perseverance in the face of seemingly insurmountable challenges. The families of Vincent and Sarah had never given up believing that their children's cases would be solved, even when the trail had gone cold and the leads had been exhausted. Their faith in the system and their determination to seek justice had been vindicated by the eventual resolution of the case. The investigation had shown that justice could be served even when decades had passed, providing hope for other families waiting for answers. The resolution of the DeLuca Morrison case had also highlighted the role of chance and circumstance in solving cold cases. The discovery of the remains beneath the cyclone had been largely accidental, the result of routine maintenance work that had uncovered evidence that had been hidden for 37 years. The investigation that followed had been methodical and professional, but it had been initiated by an unexpected discovery that could have easily gone unnoticed. The case had shown that sometimes the most important breaks in an investigation came from unexpected sources. Elena's work on the case had earned her the respect of her colleagues and the gratitude of the families she had served. She had demonstrated that cold case investigations could be successful when approached with the right combination of resources, expertise, and determination. The case had become a model for other investigators working on similar cases, showing that even the oldest mysteries could be solved with persistence and modern investigative techniques. The success of the investigation had validated the importance of never giving up on seeking justice for victims and their families. The case had also provided important lessons about the nature of evil and the capacity for ordinary people to commit extraordinary acts of violence. David Kowalski had been a maintenance worker, someone who performed routine tasks and lived a seemingly normal life. His crimes had been horrific, but they had been committed by someone who appeared unremarkable and who had managed to avoid detection for decades. The case had shown that evil could hide in plain sight, and that the most dangerous predators were often those who seemed the most ordinary. As Elena reflected on the case years later, she was struck by the complexity of the emotions it had evoked. The successful resolution had brought justice for Vincent and Sarah, but it had also opened old wounds and created new challenges for their families. The case had demonstrated the importance of cold case investigations and the value of never giving up on seeking justice, but it had also shown the limitations of the criminal justice system in addressing historical crimes. The work had been both rewarding and heartbreaking, providing closure for some while highlighting the permanent damage that violence inflicts on individuals and communities. The legacy of the DeLuca Morrison case would continue to influence cold case investigations for years to come, demonstrating that justice could be served even when decades had passed, and providing hope for other families waiting for answers.